Let's get started. So I'm assuming you guys can see my screen.
Yep.
Yes.
Now I can't see you when I go into presentation mode. Hey, thanks everybody for joining us. A quick look. Yep, and that's the wrong presentation. Let me get the right one up. Oh, maybe it's not. Oh, wait. Yeah, it is. So Stuart, I didn't realize you had a place up in Blakesley. I knew Wes had something up there at one point, but I grew up not too far from there.
So yeah, where'd you grow up, Bernie?
Wes's family is named Blakesley, actually.
Yeah, I know.
That's his town. His ancestors settled that.
Yep, years and years and years ago.
Wow.
Morning.
Go to Helen's house. He's never heard.
So I grew up near Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Which isn't too far from Blakesley. I went to school, my undergrad in East Stroudsburg.
Okay.
You have all your teeth. That's BS.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. God.
People, I actually created a presentation last night and I can't find it.
Yeah, talk off the cuff.
Yeah, well, I was
You're
proud of
professor,
myself.
but
Yeah.
that's
well,
what I used to do when I taught.
I think we'll have it in a second here. I've never been good at talking without a PowerPoint. I guess it was just all my big company presentations. We all good now?
Yeah, that's an older one though.
That's an older one. Darn it.
I thought the one you had said 32323.
So this has the wrong cover on it, but the right presentation. So anyway,
Oh, interesting.
Here's the agenda for today. We lost a couple minutes here. We'll try to make them up, but we'll go through it pretty quickly. But the key topics today are just talk about where we are on the strategic plan a little bit, but talk about new business, survey objectives, and then Becky wanted to cover off on a charging document that she was asked to bring to this committee. So we'll get going. First of all, I just thought, want to welcome John Lynch and maybe introduce ourselves to John. John approached us about 2.5 months ago and was accepted, I think, about maybe 5 weeks ago at the board meeting. But, I've shared with him all the work that we did, and he's really been engaged and asked some good questions. So I thought, I'll let John, why don't you introduce yourself, a little bit of your background, and we'll go from there. And we'll have everybody introduce themselves just to get to know each other a little bit.
Sure. I'm John Lynch. I've lived in the Pines for over 20 years. I'm on my second house in the Pines. So, know the culture, know the community pretty well. I came from, I've been retired for 4 years. I came from Cisco Systems, where I was an account manager there, and I sold to the federal government. So I did that for 24 years with Cisco, and then other jobs before that. I'm a veteran of the U.S. Navy, married for 35 years, and I'm just anxious to give something back to the community. That's what we talk to. I have a lot of experience in strategic planning because in the federal government, they produce strategic plans, and a lot of times I had to analyze those, even provide input for future plans for the government. So I'm just anxious to see how this all will come together. So that's the short version.
Cool. Yeah, I'll go next. I'm Bernie McGarry, and I've been involved with the committee. I guess I've been on the committee for 3 years, but we really didn't get going for the first year. We didn't really do much. My background is in marketing, mostly in the food business, Kraft, Hershey, Campbell's, and then Purdue Farms. And I retired like you about 4 years ago, but as Stuart mentioned, I'm teaching, and I probably need to retire again, so to have more free time. That's a little bit about me. Who wants to go next?
It's Helen. I'll go.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Helen. Nice to meet you. I'm your nurse. Need a nurse? I'm retired from the VA, Veterans Administration, for 37 years. I retired 10 years ago and had a lot of experience in critical care, long-term care, and many years in administration, and worked on developing a strategic plan for nursing for Washington, Martinsburg, Baltimore VA hospitals. So I've enjoyed this committee. I think we've done a lot, and look forward to you joining us.
How about Jenny next?
This is Jenny Cropper Rhines. I'm born and raised in the area, and I've been here forever. I sell real estate locally in Ocean Pines and Ocean City. I've been on the committee since it reformed. I guess it was gone for a while and came back. I've served on committees for a long time in Ocean Pines. I chaired the 50th anniversary committee and also the communications committee. So welcome aboard.
I'm not going to call on people, just anybody jump in. And by the way, I just want to go back before I forget. Helen, congratulations. Helen's term has been extended thanks to Stuart getting her on the last board meeting and getting approved. So I'm sorry about the delay on that, but I'm glad it happened. So welcome for another 2 years.
It's 2 on the second one, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
I'll jump in. Right. Welcome, John. I'm Wes Blakesley, Penn State engineer that went over to the dark side and became a lawyer. Ultimately became the head of the office at Johns Hopkins University that commercializes all the inventions at the university. I've been retired from there for about 7 years, do consulting now. My first building lot was in Pintail in Ocean Pines, and eventually gave it to my in-laws. They built a house there about 30 years ago, and we now have a home finally in Turns Landing. But I'm still not down there full time yet, trying to convince my wife of that.
I live in Turns Landing too. That's interesting.
Great.
Yeah, we have to diversify the committee a little bit more. We got too many of us in turns right now.
Hi, I'm Gary Miller. I've been here in Ocean Pines for 20 years, full-time for 16. I'm also chair of the Aquatics Committee, and I've been on a couple other committees. So, John, welcome.
I guess I'm up next. Hey, John, good morning. This is Rob Kiesling. I'm technically, I guess I'm a part-time resident. I still have a home in the Bel Air, Hartford County area where I spent most of my life, grew up, raised my kids there, but kind of been a part of this community for about 30 years. My parents retired here in '92, and I kind of took over their house when they left in '07. But I have a home that I probably spend about 70% of my time right on Ocean Parkway. Retired, gosh, going on 4 years ago after 29 years in the telecom business. I retired from AT&T, so had many dealings with some of your Cisco brethren. So probably, yeah, we sat around a table, we might have some common names in common, folks that we've worked with. But spent most of my life doing that. As a retiree now down here, I try to give back to the community, and that's one of the reasons why I'm part of this committee. I do a lot of volunteer work, but I do also dabble in commercial real estate, and most recently, a little hobby I'm turning into trying to commercialize. I'm a certified drone pilot, so aerial photography is something I'm trying to develop and do some work with both here and up in the Baltimore area. But welcome, nice to have you with us.
Good for you.
Thank you.
I guess I'm last. Welcome to Lachernick. I'm your board liaison. I ran for the board 3 times. I won this past election, and I find that this committee is really, hate to say strategic, but it is strategic. It's really important to know where you came from, to know where you're going to, and have a plan to get there. And I've been firmly been part of this, whether as a spectator or as your liaison for a while now. And I can't speak high enough about Bernie. He kind of knows his crap.
Well, thank you.
You know, as I listened to the introductions and yourself, John, it's just amazing, you know, the people on this committee and how much they're involved. I mean, Jenny's involved with so much, Helen's involved with so much, Gary's involved with so much. You know, Wes is on his second or third career. And you always joke about, you know, I'm not being a rocket scientist. Well, we have a rocket scientist on the committee, so it's kind of fun. But anyway, I guess that's it. So I just thought it's good to just ground everybody. And again, congratulations, Helen, on being selected, or just really valuable member of the committee. So one of the things we did, you know, and we had this is the second committee meeting with technical issues, but back in December, we went through a bunch of possibilities of things to work on. And the two that resonated with the team, you know, back in January, then when we settled in, was two things to focus on, which is great because we had a list of about 10. Was ensure the strategic plan comes to life, or the strategic plan draft, I'll call it, and develop plans and processes. So where there's not processes in place, wherever we can help with something like that. And then secondly, develop and execute another property owner survey, or two, if we need it, but, you know, we'll focus on one to gauge current status. So those are kind of two key topics for the meeting. I do want to recognize that there were some other things mentioned down here, community amenity benefits. And I just, you know, I sent a note to Josh and John the other day. Just, I think, you know, one of the things that we talked about in this committee was making sure people understand the value of the amenities and how they help to reduce your HOA fees. So I think, you know, whether it's the communication committee behind this, or Josh or John, I think they're doing a tremendous job with that, compared to previous years where people just didn't understand it, according to our survey and some of our other thoughts. So just a shout out that there is some good progress being made. As far as next items on the agenda, it was really, and again, sir, I'm not sure if you're prepared to discuss this, but, you know, one of the things that we did a survey, came up with core values, and we were concerned about, you know, whether there was money in the budget for implementing core values or community core values. And I know it probably wasn't that much money in the scheme of things, but I don't know where this ever ended up. I don't listen to all the board recordings. I know you tried several times and brought it up, but I'm not sure if anything ever landed on that. You might be on mute, Stuart.
Oh
There you
yeah,
go.
that newfangled thing. I actually had a discussion with Doug last night about this, and it's like I'm going to need some help on how do we disseminate core values. What do we need to do? Do we need to make posters up? I don't know. I could use a hand with point me to what you want me to bring to the board for core value implementation, and I'll do it.
Happy to do that. In fact, Helen Johnson put that together, a recommendation how they should be implemented. So we could, you know, and it was something that probably was discussed before you were on the committee, but we thought through that because Josh had the same question. And, you know, it's not just posters, but, you know, there's little things like I know with the companies I work for, once they establish core values, they might give out, you know, it's about communication, it's about education, but it's about, you know, you could recognize employees, you know, based on certain core values. You know, the board would need to adopt it. And I forget what else you had in your recommendation, Helen, but we could forward that to you. Helen, any comments on that?
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me either, but yeah, things also like incorporating the community. Is there a community member that exemplifies the core values? Because it's really beyond just you know, the administrators, you know, the board itself and the employees. I think it's the whole community should be able to embrace the core values. I'm kind of the Pollyanna of the group here, but you know, I have high hopes for everybody. So yeah, Bernie, if you could send that over, I could forward that over to Stuart, and if he has any questions, I'd be glad to work with him and talk with him about it.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question, Helen?
Sure.
The volunteer appreciation night, there's a dinner, and where everybody got the invitation, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I mean, that's something that transmits core values. The cover letter that John put in with our assessment package, that communicates core values. So I see some things that are being kind of done, but they're done organically. John's cover letter specifically came from this group's effort, but the volunteer appreciation night, any of those types of things. I mean, they're open to funding. I did bring up the $5,000 budget item to my colleagues. They're open to it, but we need to have specific things that you'd want to spend or things of that nature so that I could bring it to them.
And we will do that. And again, there's just like, there was a value at my last company I worked for, and one of them was continuous improvement. They wanted people to continuously improve and move forward and get, educate and improve the company. And I just happened to get that award, and it was a big deal. I got the continuous improvement award, and it was one of the biggest awards. But I mean, it was presented in front of all the leadership, and they made a big deal out of it. And, and I get the stuff on LinkedIn now. So-and-so from Brazil won the, transparency award and things like that. So I'm not saying you give awards for all 6 core values. And this is something that kind of leads into the next topic of, bringing the strategic plan to life. And this is on me, or at least we talked about this, is, developing the strategic plan draft. And maybe it's something that, so my vision on this, and I want the committee's input on this, is the background would be the committee did a lot of work, from benchmarking other communities through, looking at a lot of different things, updating the board probably 6 times, and doing a survey, doing town halls, and coming up with these are the 4 goals. And one of the goals was implementation of core values, or at least living by the core values. And then it was turned over to John, Viola, and Linda and team to create, that was their choice to sort of say, hey, listen, we'll take this on, we'll create the strategic plan. So they created a 35-page document, maybe it's 40 pages, that was pretty well done. That's, if I could, it's in a binder sitting on a desk somewhere, there was things like new vision and mission statements for the community, that we had approved, that the board approved. And I don't know that they've been implemented or changed. We talked about the core values. So I think what, the goal of is to try to bring that to life a little bit. And we talked about it in the last meeting where we had some technical issues that, Stuart's our 3rd liaison. And again, God love him, he was involved, he used to come to our meetings before he was on the board. But, there's been not inconsistency, but, we're going on the 3rd board president, and in about 4 months, we'll have the 4th board president, and there's different, and Becky's finally coming in. So, I mean, anyway, so there's different versions or different visions of what a strategic plan is. So my thoughts are to, and I'm not sure, Stuart, we'll talk about the process in a second. How do we get this done? Is it just a letter of recommendation? Is it a charging document? But basically to say, listen, there is a binder that is pretty, some pretty good work has been done. And now my battery's running low for some reason. But anyway, I think I should be good now. But basically say, listen, we'd like to have maybe a 90-minute work session with the board, maybe John and is it Steve, the financial guy, and just have a work session where we go around the room, and I'd sent you some recommendations of what it could look like, but transitioning the goals, which are broad and non-specific, like, maintain financial stability, to what does that mean? Like, how are you going to know whether you did that or not? And what does that look like? Or really coming into, okay, over the next 5 years, when it comes to infrastructure improvements, what are your objectives? Is it to finish up the, XYZ? So I think within 90 minutes, I would be happy if we came out of that meeting and said, okay, here's the goals that the board is setting along with John, and the financial guy. I bring him in because I think he's a key factor as well over the next 3 years. And the strategies don't change, even though it's almost like a year later. And make sure that we have something that we look at it 3 years from now and say, yeah, that's what we said we're going to do. And those were the things that got done. So I'll call it bringing it to life, determining outcomes for the strategic plan. And I think we could potentially fold in the discussion about values at the same time. Like, the value part was the most severe negative issues with the community, and again, think when this was done, what was going on? There was something with the board, and it was, when we did the survey, what was the issue going on? The board was fighting for something, but they're in court, and it was just a very negative situation. But the big issue was transparency. Now, we made a lot of transparency, but we need to remind ourselves to continue to be transparent. And but I mean, I think within a 90-minute work session, if the board is willing to do that, I mean, and I would say that, hey, listen, if I was Doug Parks, or if I was, some of the other board members that have been involved, to get this finally blessed and out there, it's a big accomplishment. It's something that hasn't been done in 30 years. And I think just for my own sake and representing the committee, we did a lot of work, and we feel it's sitting on the shelf. And, and it was somebody's, got that done. Okay, now let's move on. And we want to bring it to life. So, but I'd ask the committee with any other comments that they have, either to support or disagree or add to what I said. Yeah, Stuart.
Yeah. The thing that I see as the biggest weakness with this committee is that, talk about a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses. The weakness is the board liaison. We keep changing every year. So we can make some sort of recommendation that we change the board liaison representative to more than one term or something like that. This way we can see through a project, because, Colette was your,
yes,
Colette?
Yeah, the first one.
Yeah, Colette was the first one. I think Amy was with you.
Yes. Yeah.
And now it's me. And it's like, in 3 years, you have 3 different people. And there's no institutional knowledge from our perspective of what you've done in the past as opposed to going forward, because as soon as it changes, there's no real information that's transferred to the next person that's in this position. That's a weakness.
That's how the organization is set up. So when we have our elections the way that, our election cycle is, that's not a committee-based issue. That's an issue of really above us. So we're working in an environment that is propagating that.
That happens in organizations with directives like we have. And in my experience, at least with the Realtor organization, if there wasn't a staff liaison that attended all the meetings, it was impossible to have consistency and execution, because there was no consistency. And while I can appreciate having a liaison consecutive terms, that's still transitional, and you hope that someone who works for the organization would be longstanding, and it just seems like it's valuable enough that the time should be devoted to it.
Or
Good point.
and I think maybe there needs to be a mechanism put in place at the board level so that when people are outgoing, and there's a transition in liaisons to committees, that they're briefed in terms of what's going on in that committee.
Becky, I
But it
agree.
doesn't bring the history. It doesn't bring the why it's like that, and that's why in my opinion, I mean, I hear you, Becky, and I think that obviously I think they probably do some of that, but without the staff that's executing it, in my humble opinion, gets lost.
Yeah.
And that's
Rob,
not just this committee. and that's been an
Okay.
ongoing thing in my brain, as much of this stuff as I have done with the organization is it gets dropped at the staff level.
Yeah, my wish would have been, and I think we had it in lesson learned, is we took it to the 10-yard line, or maybe the 30-yard line. And, and for whatever reason in the handoff, John says, I'll take it from here, and used his own template and went from there, where there could have been, I'm teaching strategic planning now, but it could have been a process where, we help facilitate, because none of his staff knew how to do a strategic plan or, hadn't had any experience, but there was probably, but that's in hindsight. So going forward, we know we want to change that. But rather than me talking, Rob, you had something to say, and you were kind to sort of back off.
No, the only comment I was just making was, Stuart was commenting about, you guys were commenting about the multiple liaisons. I'm just commented that's probably not unique to this committee. That's all. Nothing really observation.
Gary, any thoughts from your end? You're on multiple committees. About bringing it.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. I've got a couple different thoughts on it. Number one, if somebody like Stuart gets put on as a liaison at the beginning of his first term and then stays there through however many times he gets reelected, you've got consistency there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. With the committees I've been on, I've had some where the liaison was not particularly good or helpful, and we were very happy when things got changed. And we've also had instances where somebody's been the liaison and they stayed with us for a couple of years. So it is an issue and it's a problem, but hopefully Stuart will be with us until whatever time he's no longer able to run, and that consistency will then be there with that.
I'm going to request this group again after the next election when the liaisons are reassigned. It happens during our organizational meeting, and then we put our requests in for which committees we want. I think I also want the aquatics committee, to be honest with you, too.
Stuart, is there like a process or something that says that you're supposed to switch to get exposure, or like is there something that guides the assignment? No. Okay.
No. It's just the preference of the person that puts in for that committee appointment. Like anybody really do the art committee.
Yeah.
Because that's
Stuart, are the committees able to ask for a particular board member to be their liaison, or is it strictly up to the board?
That's a good question, Gary. I don't know. I can ask. I'll find out, because I think that it's up to the board. But listen. I can give you a charging document to come up with a process by which committee members stay the same. But if you get a liaison that's less than optimal, you're kind of stuck with that person, and then you're screwed. But if you get somebody that's great, it's a crapshoot. There's 7 individuals on this board, and we all have our strengths and weaknesses. And some people are more engaged than others. But I want aquatics next year also, in addition to this.
So going back to do other people agree with sort of my assessment that we did a lot of work and it's sitting on a shelf and hasn't been implemented, or at least it's hard to I mean, I completely agree, and I said that is some of the communication, and John's communication is demonstrating core values and some of the things that we talked about. But Um, or am I overthinking this and I should just say, hey, I'm glad we have something that, has been done and let's move on.
That's one of the problems.
Me being new to this is I'm just hearing everything, so I don't really have a history, but it sounds to me like you got three things going on at the same time. The first one is the liaison with the board, and I do think there should be some kind of, hey, you're on now, and the new one's coming on, and there should be some period of time that maybe both participate, so there can be a handoff. I also think that the staff thing should be implemented, because that will be a constant. So if you have somebody from the staff involved in the process, that would be good as well. And then the third one, which was probably the hardest, would be, all right, you've got I don't know the budgeting process and how requests bubble up through the different parts of Ocean Pines, but if somebody requests for something to be budgeted into the future, they need to write a document of some kind, I would imagine. And in that document, and this is what the federal government was doing, you have to tie the core values or the strategic plan to your request. So therefore, you're kind of tied into everything that's going on, and it's always looking back at what you've been producing, and that would make it relevant, and that would make it obviously people would be more interested in making sure the core values were adopted, and et cetera, et cetera. At least that's, again, I'm just looking at it as a brand new guy, so if I said something that isn't right, I apologize.
Good perspective, real good.
Bernie, can you elaborate on you mentioned staff being involved with the committees. I'm not sure I understand exactly what you mean by the staff. You're looking at John Viola's staff and having a representative that would be there that would go directly to John, or another staff member? I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, number one, I'm not sure what happened, because we did have, Steve was officially, on our committee, but was too busy to show up. He was a financial guy, which I thought was real critical to have on the committee. And then Josh was our liaison to the staff for a long time. And it was great because, think of our survey and how smoothly that went from a communication standpoint. And then again, we are being recorded. I don't know what happened, but then like all of a sudden there's no more staff on committees. Something must have happened, and maybe it was something in this committee. I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden there's no direct connection to John or his staff. And, it's one of those things where if Josh was on our committee, he would update, John on what's going on within the committee, or, what's going on with the strategic plan. So there was some linkage there. And I'm not sure what changed that there's nobody on this committee or any other committees, I don't think, that are staff members.
Does it have anything to do with the fact that the committees are all supposedly board advisory committees and aren't supposed to interact with the staff?
I can only guess. I don't know.
Stuart?
Yeah, I think that from the perspective of the board, we're obviously policy, and operations is generally it is under the purview of John. So like I'm not supposed to call a specific member of our staff without going through John, because then I'm looking at possibly interfering with operations. And I get that, and I called Josh this morning when we couldn't get in. I go, listen, we need some help, and he fixed it. But generally speaking, you're right. But we also have Josh available as our PR person to get press releases out on behalf of this committee, and we can use that to broadcast core values in a way that it really doesn't cost anything, because we're getting email blasts to our town all the time from Josh, and that's his thing. I don't think that there's an issue. I can check, but I don't think there's an issue with contacting somebody in operations to do something like Josh. But I know that I'm not supposed to contact anybody without going through John. I say, hey, John, I got this issue, but and then he delegates that out to whoever, because policy comes from the board members.
I
And-
believe if you
but
go directly to Josh, he's gonna have to put it through John before anything can happen. So
Right.
I think if you want something like that, it would be more unfortunate. And in my humble opinion, I understand why the policy is in place, but it is so cumbersome.
Oh, I
And
agree.
that I believe that's why it gets, so many things get lost in the shuffle, is because you got to go to here before you can go to there, who has to go back to here before you want to do one little something. You know what I
Yep.
mean? So I think there's a point where people just give up because it's so much trouble.
Yeah, as an example, I helped get us into SurveyMonkey when we did our survey and getting an annual subscription, and Josh and I kind of shared a link and we could have access to it. But if I wanted to get in there now to create a new survey, I would have to send an email to you, to request to John, to request to Josh to get me access to that SurveyMonkey. You know, and but it can be done, but it is cumbersome. And I'm not saying that's the big issue. I just don't know why the staff involvement with this committee got dropped off. But we're probably spending too much time on the issue. There is issues, and John, you summarized it very well, about the staff not being involved. But to me, I'm not getting, am I the only one that's being anal about not having the strategic plan come to life? I mean, has the vision been updated? Has the mission been updated on the website? Is there any of that done?
So I think the answer is no. And I have to agree with the general group here that the process that the board has between the board members and the operational side of the business and the crossover communication that has to occur is cumbersome. And the elections that we have causes drop off of intellectual property, so that the left hand doesn't really know what the right hand is doing as we move forward. So the recommendation from our group is really that the board really needs to look at their communication pattern and determine how they can be more efficient, because it's not affecting only our group, it's affecting the Racket Club, it's affecting every other committee in Ocean Pines who wants to get things done. And what we've seen in the past is that people come out of committee and they go around committee to bring the attention of issues directly to board members or directly to the operational side, and then we get action. So it's that communication is above our committee level, but the recommendation I think from the committee level is that that has to improve somehow, and that has to come from the I believe has to come from the homeowners board as to how they want to revise or move forward in their communication pattern.
I can tell you from a historical standpoint, this was evaluated and it hasn't been all that long ago. And that's when the use of the charging document came back into, I mean, that charging document was virtually original to the beginning of the organization. It just never got used. So several years ago, and Doug Parks and Colette, myself, and someone from the staff that may have turned over, Michelle Bennett, sat down and updated those documents. And that was to make sure that the committee's requests were getting to the liaison, and the liaison had something clear and concise to bring to the board. And while it makes a lot of sense, it's just a slow process. And in my experience, it's not necessarily the information. I think that all committee members are looking for a way to show that their time has had value to the organization. Mm-hmm. And what ends up happening is so much work gets thrown out the window because it's not embraced by leadership, whether it's the board, whether it's management. And it's an ongoing thing. It's a hard problem to solve, not just for our organization, but if you want to keep committee members engaged, there has to be a better way to show value and embrace the work they've done.
Yeah.
Can,
That's a good, real good.
to Stuart, the role of the liaison, I understood the role is one of, I can advise you. I can't tell you what to do. I can advise you. But does the liaison then go to the board and say, this is what we discussed at our last strategic planning committee meeting, and this is what we need? Do you bless this? Can we move forward with this? How do you share do you share our minutes, what we've done with the board, and do you get any specific feedback from them to bring back to us?
That's a great question. Typically, the way it happens, Bernie, your chair, will email me, or since I'm actually sitting on all the meetings anyway, Bernie says, hey, listen, can you go to the board and do X, Y, or Z? And I'll say, Bernie, send me an email, and then I'll discuss it with all seven. All seven of us will discuss. And if it needs to come up, typically we'll discuss this before, it's not going to be in an open board meeting. We're going to discuss this. I'll get back to Bernie with what the consensus was on the group, and whether we're moving forward, if there's any issues not to move forward. But yeah, Bernie is the one in charge. He says, Stu, I need you to talk about X, Y, or Z. I have this concern, and I do it, and I bring it forward. Steve, he's on the communications committee, and he brings forward issues that the communications committee has for all of us to discuss, whether or not we're moving forward with whatever. So that's pretty much the way it works. And then as a policy making group, we'll make the policy depending on your advice or your input, and then we move on, or we shoot it down. But typically, everyone on all of these committees, everybody's giving up their time to make our town better, and we all understand that. And I'll be honest with you, I'm on the oceanpines.org website looking for the strategic plan. I can't even find it. And the last thing that was on there was from January. And, I like the idea. Bernie, email me and say, listen, one of the big weaknesses, and I'm going to talk to all of my colleagues with this, one of the big weaknesses here is the turnover in the liaison every election. But then again, to Gary's point, if you get a liaison that's less than optimal, I mean, there's got to be a process that you have a mutiny and ask to have a different liaison. But that's a serious weakness in this this kind of a thing where, listen, I've only been with you guys since what, August, September? It's March. Yeah. I mean, Amy was with you for the time that she was appointed, I think from the previous October or November. Sure. Until I took it, and then Colette for a year. There's no consistency or institutional knowledge of what's going on beforehand.
So I don't think that anything that's sort of happened to us has been a unique experience in that. I think someone mentioned, I can't remember if it was Jenny or Becky, you see this a lot. Even when I came on the committee, I wanted to, as John mentioned, one of the reasons we volunteers, we want to try to give back, now that we have a little bit more time available, not working full time. And, but I was always concerned about what would ever happen to what we did, what work, we did as a committee. And it's so dependent, and I've seen it in other organizations, been members of all kinds of different things over the many, many years, that are run by boards, but then have committees. If you get into the corporate level, Bernie, where you're used to working, and you have a corporate board that's the same people for 15 and 20 years that look to the committees as the resource for their time to give them direction on how to run the company, you generally get pretty good uptake from what's produced by board committees. When you're involved in organizations, whether they be the Rotary or some other place like that has a board that's elected and people maybe serve 6 years at the most, on those places, Yeah, I saw you dropped out there, Stuart. That, oftentimes, the stuff from the committees comes up, but everybody who's been, newly elected has their own agenda, their own
Yeah.
things that they want to work on, and you don't necessarily get the same view of, the work of the committee. It really does become advisory as opposed to, something that the board has set up to be, real guidance to the board. And I think that some of that happened, here in terms of, we did all the work, we put this together. I thought the committee, there were a lot of people on the committee, and the committee worked really hard. But I also had the feeling that I think a lot of the people who have been on here for a while have had, is that, we put it up, we presented it, the board said, thank you very much, but nothing particular has happened, to implement that. And anybody that's been involved in strategic planning, and I know, Bernie, you've got a lot of years experience of this in the corporate world, in general, the way it's done, if you do a strategic plan, you have continuing, milestones and guides that the bosses, whether they be the board or whether the board sends that down to the officers. In my organization, when I ran the tech transfer office, the first thing we did was a strategic plan, because none had ever been done. And then we had regular meetings after we had, agreed and got the whole group to agree what our plan was. We had regular discussions about how we were progressing on that plan. And I think that's the only way, you can be successful with a plan, is you say, well, this is the plan. Because let's face it, when you start adopting the plan, it often changes, as Bernie, I'm sure, well knows. So that, I think we're just in, all our experience here is just what you often experience in organizations that are set up like our organization.
Yeah, good analogy there between corporate and I'll call volunteer, or in this case, homeowners association. But again, I started this out. I mean, to me, my passion for this, I went to a budget meeting in January 3 years ago, and they were approving the budget. And I asked one question as a public comment: how does this align? How does your annual budget align with your strategic plan?
Yep.
And the answer was, that's a great question. We don't have a strategic plan. We need one to provide future direction and align to that. And I would say that we have a strategic plan sitting on a shelf with no, I'll call it, clear outcomes that you can go back and say, did you complete that or not? So to wrap this up, I'm going to, and Jenny mentioned it, I'm going to put a charging document together and force the issue that incorporates maybe a little bit of the liaison issue, but more importantly about the implementation of the strategic plan and why it's important, including core values. Okay, and we'll take it from there. But that was a discussion, and again, I think it's enough discussion on that, and really good input. It's something I love about the committee. It's 10 o'clock. We might not get through all this. And anybody have any ideas? So, yeah, well, let's try it for a couple minutes. So previous survey objectives, a survey hadn't been done. Love the fact that different departments and different areas are doing surveys to obtain input and insights from OP property owners on a long-range plan for Ocean Pines. We were looking at overall satisfaction. We were looking at what's most important, okay, and how we're doing. So, what was important to property owners. And if you remember, safety was important, and we're doing pretty well. Infrastructure was important, and we're not doing so well. Beautification was something that we're, that we're doing okay at, but could be improved. So there was a lot of different things where we identified gaps of what's important to homeowners and how Ocean Pines is currently doing. And then importance of core values. We had this idea that, that there was a lot of issues. This was 3 years ago, 2 years ago. It was 2 years ago that, it was a soft things that we wanted to measure. And then finally, what was the last one? Feedback on key issues and opportunities. So there was things like traffic on 589 and a whole bunch of other stuff. And interesting enough, electronic voting, which 68% of the people, top 2 box, wanted electronic voting. But I understand we're putting on hold, but the property owners wanted electronic voting. 13%, were against it. I don't know, 68-13 is a lot better than the recent communication survey that was 60-40. But anyway, feedback on key issues and opportunities. And then we drove the questions off of that. And then just what I sent out in my cover letter is once we had the objectives, and this is what, you know, I did marketing research is the only reason I know this, is you tie your questions to what your objectives are. So you don't end up with 30 questions. I mean, if you have 8 objectives for your survey, you're going to end up with 30 questions. So with that, let's have some open discussion about what our objectives should be this time as we start to think about a survey. And from a timing standpoint, I'm thinking, well, we could talk about timing separately, but open discussion on, you know, and again, I had somebody say to me, why would you do another survey? Well, it's to track how we're doing, you know, compared to where we were 3 years ago. And I think we made a lot of improvements. You know, we've had two reductions in HOA fees. There's been a lot of positive momentum. There's probably still some issues, but thoughts on objectives? I'll shut up. Anybody?
I don't have a problem with having a similar survey and taking the pulse to see whether there's been a sentiment change that's come about as a result of some of the things. I think one of the things that we have accomplished, at least in my mind, I think we have, you know, a little bit better is I think there's a better appreciation from what I, you know, the little bit of communication I get with other folks in the Pines of the fact that the amenities aren't just dragging us down. I don't know whether we've improved that, but you know, if we could have sort of a similar survey, but maybe tweak some of the questions to try to get more of that sentiment, that could be helpful.
Wes, I like the word sentiment because, you know, this is really just, it's not to gain insights into a plan. It's more just, hey, what's the sentiment? You know, what's your current feelings on these issues or whatever. Anybody else?
Yeah, I agree with Wes that the survey was a good survey, and I think there's nothing wrong with asking similar questions. Certainly, it'll help us measure, you know, our progress. You know, maybe we can see if satisfaction improved or not.
Yeah.
Tweak the questions as we go along. I don't know what the core values show this year, if they have any sense of, you know, how are we doing as far as, you know, A, B, C, D, E.
Yeah, and I think those results will improve even though we haven't implemented. And going back, Stuart, about the budget. The only reason I was being anal on the budget is, in my corporate experience, if it's not budgeted, it doesn't get done. That's all.
Oh.
But
True.
it doesn't cost a lot of money. I mean, we were requesting $5,000, and I know, John, that could be a rounding area within communications, which doesn't have a huge budget. But I mean, it was not necessarily the dollar amount. It was the fact I was pushing on making sure it got done. Other thoughts on objectives?
I do. I also agree that I remember a conversation when we were doing one of the group meetings with the board, and one of the questions was, how do we measure achievement with this? And it would seem to me, at least in other organizations that corporate, like for my company, they do an annual survey.
Yeah.
And it seems like that would make a lot of sense. And at the beginning of the survey, you say, did you realize these are the 6 core values that we've established for Ocean Pines? How do you feel about, and make it specific to the core values, because I'd be willing to bet 95% of the population doesn't know we have them.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah,
I like that a lot.
I think it's important to repeat the survey because we have the initial survey as a benchmark, and we need ongoing data points to compare to make decisions moving forward. And I agree with the annual, if not biannually, but I would like to suggest perhaps that we begin with a review of the questions that were on the original survey to determine whether they're appropriate. Some of them will probably continue to be appropriate, but then we can also modify some of those questions to get more specific. We're dealing with a time and a place now where we're through COVID. We've come out on the other side, we've had significant improvements in the community where we've had projects that have completed, for example, the North Gate. So we would want to ask people about that. We can infuse the core values in there with examples of, we'll have to really think about that, but we can infuse the core values in examples of the questions that we ask people. So if we go back over that survey and fine tune it and make it even more specific, the next goal would be that we have to get that survey out to as many people as possible and encourage as many people as possible to answer that survey. We had, I think, what, 1,800 last time out of 8,000 homeowners. So even though and we had a statistical result, but we can really only generalize it to that population. So we really want to increase the amount of people that are participating. And then that leads into the other committees repeating their surveys. And I think that's something that we should be encouraging other committees to do. For example, the Racket Center, or the recreation complex, they're going to be faced with a lot of decision making in the next couple of years. What do those members want down there? What do they find is important down there? So, and I would say, I think the summertime is a great time to release it because we have our part-time homeowners and our full-time homeowners back. And we have people engaged in the summertime and summertime activities. So they're going to the pool, they're going to the yacht club, and we can have, like we did before, those links at those areas.
Very good. Anybody else? Rob?
No, I'm in complete agreement with everybody, Bernie. I think you might have used this term once before, but we at AT&T, we did an annual thing. Survey employees, we call it the Net Promoter Score.
Yep.
I think I might have heard you use that before.
Yep.
And I agree. And we commented earlier, you commented earlier, Bernie, about how things kind of get parked on the shelf. If we continue to do a survey on an annual basis and the objectives in the past, the last one we did were certainly broad, but they're very relevant. And as folks have mentioned, we kind of tweak the questions. We keep, here you are again, guys. It's been sitting on the shelf for a year. Well, here's this year's results, and here's this year's results. Continue to provide that benchmark or temperature check, however you want to term it, so that it's always in front of leadership.
Yeah, there was, and Gary, I'll go to you in a second, but there is, I didn't really think about this, but the consistency of some of the questions is going to be important. I mean, because you get that benchmark over the years. So there are some that you don't want to change, like Net Promoter Score, which was one of our last questions. So it also, from a timing standpoint, so as we go on further comments, I kind of agree that last time we did it September through November, to get it out there in the summer and get it back, also could potentially impact budgeting and things like that. So that would be one of the reasons, in addition to having both full-time and part-time people in the area. But Gary, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, and this is a little bit of a downer for what we've all been talking about. But as you mentioned, a lot of the committees are sending out their individual surveys. We're talking about doing another one. Last time we only got 1,800 results out of 8,000. I'm a little concerned, and I don't know how we would work with this, but the more surveys that people get, the less likely they are to respond to all of them. It's one of those things where, gee, I got another survey today. Do I really want to fill this out? So I think it's important for us to do another survey, especially for all of the reasons everybody's talked about. But one of the things we need to look at is how do we approach it so that we continue to get a decent response and maybe increase the response, considering people are starting to get inundated with all these surveys.
That's a great point. I mean, we could talk about incentives and some other things, but, and again, I'll argue that 1,890 was a pretty good number, but we'll try to get better. I mean, will we get that number again? We want to go, as Becky said, ideally you want to go beyond that. I'm just going to pick on the new guy. John, any other thoughts on survey or processes?
Yeah, so I think getting people's attention is probably the first thing you need to think about. So if you send out some, if 15 committees send out 15, polls, they're, people are going to get overwhelmed with it. But this one is kind of unique because it's not just one subject. It's where we're going in the future. So by maybe a little bit of marketing, you send out a notice. Are you happy where Ocean Pines is going? Kind of comment. And if you are, that's great, and we need your input. Here's what we've done in the past. But if you aren't, or if you have some ideas, here's your chance to voice it. So I guess just a little marketing around it to make people feel like it's relevant.
Yeah, and I think what we did was, I wouldn't say best in class, but that's one of the things that we walked away with. The communication, I mean, we had it in papers, we had it everywhere, we had cards. I think at the Yacht Club would be a better place. I don't think they executed the cards with the QR code on it as well as they could have. So there were some minor things that could be improved. We had hard copies in areas where we thought people might need hard copies, so we can work on that. To wrap this up, so there's a little bit minor word smithing. It's not to obtain input, it's to gauge sentiment. And we're not looking at importance of core values. It might be more like, hey, measure, sentiment or something towards core values so we can modify those. But I think as an action step, what I'd like to do is have some volunteers that are willing to maybe look at the questions between now and next meeting. And provide some feedback about, which questions stay, how do the words change, and maybe we'll come into next meeting having a draft survey ready for this committee to review. So if you're interested in being part of that, I'll call it subcommittee, just send me a note and, or I could send it to all of you for input. And so we come into next committee. Like, again, I said in my cover note that I want to get us back on solid footing and start making some progress. But we have to start moving pretty quickly in order to get it implemented and getting board approval or whatever we have to do there. So that will be the action step on that. Now it is 10:14. We don't really have much more to cover except and if you have any other thoughts on objectives or things like that, but I was pleased to hear that the objectives are similar. The survey should be somewhat similar, maybe a few more specifics, maybe, definitely modifying it, but looking forward to some help. So the next one was, we really don't have anything else. I guess we have to leave a little bit of time for public comments, but I don't think we have anybody else on
the charging document. The charging document.
Yeah, I mean, so Becky had some thoughts that she talked to me about, and maybe some background. Maybe we'll limit to 10 minutes and then wrap it up and get some input on what Becky was asked to do by a board member and a staff member. Becky?
Yeah, so I think this is going to be a really interesting discussion considering what we have discussed in the meeting today. Colette Horn, who is the advisor to the Racket Center, and John Viola approached me to bring back to the committee a discussion about assistance that they need for the recreation complex in terms of deciding, in terms of assessing a stormwater drainage problem, searching the resources to address that problem, and help them with decision making. That came out of a personal conversation that I had with info at oceanpines.org about the condition of the recreation complex as a consumer member, expressing some consumer variables that are being expressed by visitors to our recreation complex, such as where do you sit? Where do you go and pay your bill? Your nets look like they're cracked. So as a result, there was a conference meeting between myself, a board member, Colette, and John Viola. And it was very productive. And to the point where they would like the strategic committee to get involved to help them decide this problem of stormwater drainage in the area and where we might come up with some solutions or information gathering. I think it's an interesting opportunity because we have the chance as a group to create a charging document that would bring that homeowners association side and the operational side together and demonstrate the process of strategic management and decision-making moving forward.
Becky, pardon me. I'm not sure I understand what the concept of a charging document is. Can you explain that a little bit? What that means?
Yes, I will. Moving forward, I will discuss that. I just lost my train of thought.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. What I noticed, so we've been talking about how to join the homeowners association side with a liaison and the operational side so that it comes together and it works to get something done. This is an example of a back way to do it. I find it very interesting. It's actually, though, being generated at the top of the organization and coming down rather than coming from the bottom of the organization and coming up. But they have a problem that they want to work together on, and they're reaching to this committee to assist them with that. In order for us to meet that request, this committee would have to agree that we could make an ad hoc committee so that there would be a committee of 2 to 3 people, and we could bring people on into our committee to help. And in order to do that, we have to have Mr. Lachernick take back to the board meeting a charging document, which actually reflects what Colette has asked. So there is a form that you get from the association and you complete it like we did for the Route 90 charging document that we did last year, where we recommended creating an ad hoc committee to follow and investigate how Route 90 would impact Ocean Pines. We had Amy Peck take that back to the board. It was presented to the board meeting. It was denied because they wanted to elevate that subject matter to a staff level. Eddie Wells is now responsible for that information. So in this example, we would be creating a charging document where we would be writing down that the strategic committee under the direction of Bernie would be creating an ad hoc committee for the purpose of serving the board to assess, it would be to strategically plan how to address stormwater conditions and other conditions at the Racket Center as we move forward to analyze as they move forward in their analyzation of that area. They're talking about a new clubhouse. They're talking about court conditions that are perhaps being undermined by water, and they need help. So that's what I'm bringing back to the group today, to discuss that and keep in mind what we've talked about prior in terms of how we're going to demonstrate how strategic planning works. Now, I will tell you, they do not have the same, there is a difference of understanding when we use the word strategic plan. The goals that we presented to the homeowners association is not a strategic plan. The mission, the vision, that everything that we did, it's part of strategic planning, but I believe that some people on the board think that is a strategic plan. The strategic plan is inclusive of the goals, then the objectives come, then the strategies come to fulfill the goals. And I think there's a place in the board and on the operational side that doesn't understand that you've got to fill in more to create a strategic plan. And this would be an opportunity to demonstrate that, meaning that, okay, we have the 5 goals that we are bound by. How do you move forward to make those decisions as it relates to the recreation complex issues?
So the tricky part here, so Wes, what's it called? It's like a letter of recommendation. The charging document is a recommendation of the board. And in this case, it would be to create a strategic planning ad hoc committee to address the issues and come up with recommendations for how to improve certain things at the racket facility. Now, when I talked to Becky about this, and I respect her coming to me, I said, well, you know, how's the racket committee going to feel? But it's interesting because, you know, she did have the discussions with John and Colette, who's the liaison for the racket committee, and they still felt that it should be in our committee, at least Colette did, because of our process expertise, that we're in a better position to handle it and to create this ad hoc committee, which will probably need an engineer on it, or, you know, if anybody has an engineering background, but almost a certain select, you know, skill set in order to identify and solve that issue. So that's the big thing is, I think Becky's asking this committee for our input or approval on basically writing a charging document to create an ad hoc committee as a subset of the strategic planning committee to make a recommendation regarding the racket center and how to improve it. And I think is that what we're discussing here, Becky, correct?
I think, yes, but I think, and we can keep it even looser than that. Yes, I think that's appropriate.
Yeah.
And the bang for the buck is that we are allowed to bring, if the ad hoc committee goes to Bernie and says, Bernie, we need the following expertise on this committee really to get the job done, we can go out and find those people. So we can expand our committee to meet the need of the association by maybe 2 people. It's nice to have an odd number of people on a committee, because then you get really democratic decision making going on.
And it aligns a little bit with our goal of implementation of the strategic plan and implementing processes that are more, I'll call it, you know, the strategic, you know, problem solving orientation, which is a lot of what I do with the students. But, you know, the tricky part is, and again, we've provided advice on a lot of the surveys that have been done, for example, as process experts, I'd call it. So it falls into that. I don't want to sway anybody either way, but thoughts before I ask Stuart his opinion?
I do have a thought.
Go ahead, Rob. Or I'm sorry, John, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so I think that there's kind of 2 sides to this. One is a turf war could start, because you've got this other committee that they're going to feel like their toes are going to get stepped on. So that's one part of the issue. The other part of the issue is it is an opportunity to show value in a real sense, in a real specific situation. So that's where I have 2 thoughts there. I wouldn't want, and I do have a fundamental question about strategic planning versus the committees that deal with all these different areas. Where do they end and we begin? That's kind of a fundamental question that we don't need to talk about it now, but that in reading all the stuff you gave me initially, I read through all the strategic plans of all the different functions of Ocean Pines, and I'm like, okay, how far do I go in? You know, yeah. And that was one of the thoughts. So I think we need to kind of assess if we're going to have some kind of turf war going on.
Right. Rob, I'm sorry. No, go ahead. Sorry.
Similar thought. Also, racket sports has their own strategic plan, do they not?
Yes.
You remember how? No. Remember when the initial
yes.
presented and everybody had a strategic plan. Yeah. So that's my only thought is like, you know, this could be, you know, part of the strategic. They could still mention that this is part of the strategic plan, their strategic plan. So either way is good. But I'm just curious why it's not coming more from them.
I think we have a process and a precedent problem here. Because if you, and while I can see, it seems like this is coming in the back door. And if you entertain this in this direction, you're setting a precedent for, it just doesn't make any sense to me to come from us. I mean, we have an environmental committee. If there's a drainage problem, we have a racket sports committee if there's a problem. But if everything starts to come through the strategic planning committee, all of a sudden we're going to have 5 ad hoc committees and no knowledge base for, it just doesn't make sense to me. I'm afraid I can see setting a procedural, showing an example of a procedural process, but it doesn't make sense to me if it's not the right procedure. It just doesn't feel right to me.
If I could comment, on the screen, it says charging document / stormwater drainage. What Becky was mentioning involved a lot more than just stormwater drainage. So I'm a little confused over whether it really would be something strictly related to the stormwater drainage, or is it something that would be more appropriate to go through the racket committee, since it sounds like you're talking about a lot more than just this one issue?
Or why wouldn't John just take it to Eddie?
Well, exactly.
I mean, this is slow. This is just, is it an effort to buffer the situation? Is there something more going on here that it feels like there's more to this? It just feels like they're slowing down the whole thing. I mean, it's going to get caught up with us when 2 of the experts could figure it out.
Eddie was involved in the meeting, so
Yeah.
Eddie was at the meeting. I think the comment about, I think the comment about the charging document, stormwater drainage is a very good observation. And there were a lot of things shared at the meeting. The stormwater drainage is the #1 concern. I agree that the environmental committee might be a more appropriate place for that. And there are multiple issues at the recreation center. I'm just not going to set, I don't want to use the term the racket center for the recreation complex. We have a recreation complex that is being looked at, not just the racket center.
Somebody mentioned about what's in the strategic plan, which is interesting. I have this book that is sitting on my shelf, which is a draft, and it's interesting. There's their racket sports key strategy: review and analyze the current infrastructure to determine areas of improvement. Okay. And then their initiative is maintain the facility. Now underlying the root problem with that, I guess, is a key part of of that process. So, but it is interesting how you referred back to, somebody said, what's in their strategic plan? And it's like, that's their #1 priority. It is to basically maintain the facility and prevent these problems from happening in the future.
Is there a
it is part of the goal.
Is there a communication situation between Parks and Rec and the Racket Center?
I can speak to the fact that there are significant communication issues within the racket center.
I'm going to, just because of the sake of time, it's 10:31. Stuart, I'm not bowing out to you, but it is something. When I talk to Becky, it's like, well, geez, could be a turf issue. Should this be the racket committee? Should this be environmental committee? And if you have no thoughts, that's fine. I just didn't know what your thoughts are.
Can you hear me? Because I had to change computers. Yeah. Jennifer actually echoed what I was going to say, and so did Gary. Listen, this is why they have those committees.
Agreed.
You know, in the racket center or recreation center, whatever you want to call it. The craziest thing is there's politics there between pickleball and platform tennis and stuff. It's the craziest thing.
Yeah.
So the Racket Sports Committee, and Eddie, let me tell you something. Our public works, there's nothing these guys can't fix. If they put their mind to it, Eddie and Nobi are unbelievable. And if they're aware of a drainage issue there, I'm telling you, they don't need a charging document. They don't need communication. They know it. And this is John's purview to get it done. That's operations. So I don't know that we need to move forward with that. I mean, but backing up for a minute, I think that somebody, maybe Bernie, should write a charging document talking about having the liaison be more than one term.
Right.
I think that's an important thing, because I think it's a huge weakness on all of these committees.
Yeah. Yeah. So Becky,
I'll take to the board anything you guys ask me to do. You had me at hello. But
I think by
it's
what
not-
they're requesting here, I think they're tossing a monkey.
yeah,
So it sounds like if we took a vote, the committee would probably be no. So I can take that back to the meeting.
Yeah.
And then that we would encourage them to use the avenue of, if they need to reach out for specialty, the environmental committee, and continue to work with what they have through the existing racket center group committees. No, yeah, the existing racket advisory committee and public works.
yeah. Yeah, it's a little, yeah, I guess that's a consensus. There was 4 or 5 people that thought it could be a turf issue. But also it's a,
I'm on board. For the record, I'm on board with it.
What's
It's
that, Rob?
also
I
a
just said-
precedent issue.
I just said for the record, I'm on board with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like
Jenny-
Becky, going back and saying, this was your number 1 objective for your strategic plan. Who's responsible for executing that? Whether it's operations or public works or whatever, but maintaining and improving that facility was your number 1 objective. So, but Becky, I applaud your efforts to bring it forward to this committee for discussion. It's always good to have good discussion on some of these things, and there's other things that have come up that we've said yes to, and then there's and they got shut down by the board, and but we will move forward on what you're recommending.
No, I think, I think it's a good thing to discuss, and that's how groups come to consensus. And it really shows that our group is a really functioning body, that we really hear and listen, and we are not afraid to, share our opinions, and they're good opinions. So that when we come up with a group consensus decision, we all stand by that. And that's something to be really proud of.
So, thank you, Becky. And Becky, I apologize to everybody for the technical difficulties. I blame it on myself this time. I actually copied that link and tested the link, and I was able to get into a meeting, but it probably was a different meeting than you guys were supposed to be in. So that was all on me this time. And when we send the notes out, I'll make sure Josh sent me the note for the calendar where the meeting invites are and stuff like that. So if there's any issues in the future, we'll prevent that. I'm always trying to do a lessons learned and how to improve. There's there's nobody else on publicly. I think we've had really good discussion. Our next meeting is a month from now. We did mention that we'll try to have anybody that's interested in looking at the survey, just send me a quick note, and do that because I know some of you are really busy. Here's a question for the group, and this will be a thumbs up kind of vote. Do you want to have, for our next meeting, would you like to be a hybrid meeting, or we have it in person and online? The other choice would be just to do it online like this meeting. So all those in favor of a hybrid meeting, thumbs up. So Gary likes it in person. I thought John might like it in person. So the fact that we have a few people in person that are voting for that, next meeting will be a hybrid meeting. Okay, there are some values in that. I was it was much easier to crawl out of bed and come here and not have to comb my hair instead of going over to the admin building. So, that makes sense. So the next meeting is kind of roughly a month from now, 9 to 10:30. It will be a hybrid meeting. Any volunteer to take minutes at the next meeting? Forgot it again this meeting.
I'll go.
I can.
No, Helen did it already. No, you did.
Oh,
it
okay,
twice.
I won't go.
I can.
Okay, thank you, Becky. Again, it's pretty simple. You just basically say, hey, here's who attended, here's the discussion, and here's the action items. So, again, we focused on, today on what our priorities are for the year, and which I feel good about, and I really feel like we're back on track after some technical difficulties and things like that of functioning as a high-performing team. So, with that, we can adjourn. If there's any other comment, Helen has something that she's dying to tell us.
No, I'm not, well, dying to tell you. So Becky, I appreciated your comments at the board meeting about the AED, the need for AEDs, and congratulations. I know one is over at Racket Sports. So we won't be dying now that we know there's an AED.
That is true. So Becky took me over to that racket facility a year ago, and we met with some people and said, this needs to be outside. People can't get in the building when it's locked. And, and I saw that myself a week or two ago, and I'm like, I said to Becky, you're going to save somebody's life someday by having this outside, and, hopefully, nothing happens, but it's there now. And there's still some minor issues to be worked out, but Becky's all over it. And that was
It's
simple.
outside, it's unlocked, and for the golfers in the group, here is what I want for you. You may have an AED in your golf clubhouse. Do you have an AED in the middle of the course?
Yeah.
So that's something that you might want to think about and bring up to your committee, because even though apparently 9 is on the clubhouse side of the course, I'm not familiar with the golf course at all. But when you cross the road and you go to 10, I think that's where the golf course kind of separates or something. So you need to think about putting 2 AEDs on that golf course, because there won't be enough time to mobilize to get it from the clubhouse to mid-course. And I just have to share with you, my husband's friend had a heart attack on the golf course when he was out in Utah. And he's okay, but he wasn't anywhere near an AED. The AED was in the clubhouse. So think about it.
Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that, Helen. Yeah, it's a simple thing, but critical. Could save somebody's life someday. So appreciate Becky's persistence and passion on this issue. With that, any other comments before we close? Stuart.
Yeah, listen, Becky's comments were actionable because she showed up at a board meeting and got the attention of the GM. I'm inviting everybody to show up at a board meeting. If you have things to say, I'll tell you, there's no better way to get it out there than to put it out there and show up. The other thing is, I don't know that you should wait another month before you have another meeting, because I was going through the strategic plan in an email that you sent me back in November, and there are dated time benchmarks. And I don't know if any of those things have been done. Just my thoughts. That's the end of my public
Trying to think what email that was, but yeah, I think part of it, we'll see. I'm on spring break this week, but I have about 30 hours of grading, I was telling Becky, so I feel like I'm really it's crazy busy, but yeah, maybe we will. I thought if we had a subcommittee get the survey finalized by next meeting, that's a huge accomplishment. And we have a couple other things to do, like charging documents and things like that. But we'll see. We missed a meeting or two, and it's a good suggestion. So with that, thank everybody. Appreciate your time.
Bernie,
yeah,
Bernie, you want to just hang on for 2 seconds?
Yeah, please. Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks everybody. Have a great day, and call me with any or email with me any other comments. Email me if you want to be involved with taking a look at the survey. Thank you very much.
So long, everybody.
Great rest of your week, guys.
Thank you.